Hey everybody, David Neagle. Welcome to another episode of the Successful Mind Podcast. Today is a real treat. I have Emma Churchman, and she just wrote The Deep End of Hope in the Wake of Hurricane Helene, which I have been very excited to hear about her experience and the book that she's written to help others. And also, I guess some of the proceeds are going to the relief victims. Is that right? Do I have that understanding correctly?
Exactly. Through Mennonite Disaster Service to support with long-term recovery.
That's great. And I watched your video on your website, and you said that like the recovery is going to be like 10 years.
Yep. There's actually this kind of cool math formula that I learned about from Mennonite Disaster Service. So for example, they work with natural disasters, all different types. If it takes 3 days to kind of make sure that everyone is alive and that people are accounted for and that everything's okay, it's going to take 3 months to get to a point where the assessment can be done of what recovery looks like. Okay. It'll take 3 years to do the initial long-term recovery in terms of rebuilding bridges or homes or roads or that kind of thing. In our case, it took 30 days to make sure that everyone was accounted for. So 10 years is a minimum amount of time that it's going to take. And estimates right now just for Western North Carolina recovery are at $53.6 billion.
Wow. Holy cow. That's crazy. And so I live in North Carolina. I live out near Taylorsville, which isn't too far from where everything happened. The night that this happened, though, was really interesting. I was getting ready to close on a home, and I came out to Taylorsville in the storm because they insisted that we finish the inspection that night, and it was like a torrential rain. Halfway through the inspection, they're telling me, you got to get out of here now. Well, first of all, it's on a river, okay? So all that water's coming down. And the only way out of here is to cross 64 where there's this big dam. And they said if they have to open the dam, and it's going to go over the bridge where the cars go across. So they're like, you have got to go now, right now. And I was like, oh my God, like, what is this? What has actually happened? I cannot imagine what it was like for you folks up in the mountains. Where do you want to start? Tell us this experience, because I have yet to talk to anybody that's actually gone through it. So respect. What happened?
Yeah. Well, what happened, David, is we were not prepared. So we're 300 miles from the coast. So by the time a hurricane hits us, it's a whisper, right? Because it bumps up against all of the mountains that surround Asheville. I live outside of Asheville, and we maybe get heavy rain. So we were kind of joking around about getting, bread and milk from the grocery, but none of us were really taking it seriously. But the issue is that we live at the top of a gorge. And so we're surrounded by mountains on all sides. And what happens in this gorge that goes from where I live in Girton down into Bat Cave, Chimney Rock, and Lake Lure is that all of the waterways converge. All of the creeks and streams come down the sides of the mountains into the gorge where there's a giant river. So the water was just gaining speed and gaining traction. And by the time it hit our area and then south of us, it was wiping out entire roads, bridges, and homes.
Did they ever say like an estimate of how much rain fell during that thing up there?
Yes, it was about 32 inches. So, 32 feet. So the average height of a 2-story house is 25 feet. And the rivers rose an extra 32 feet. So just imagine for a moment.
Yeah, I remember seeing somebody say one time that if you took an inch of water a mile squared, it was 33 million gallons of water. 1 inch for a square mile, if rainwater now, is 33 million gallons. I cannot imagine what that was like. It had to be when did you guys realize you were in trouble?
Day 4.
Day 4?
Yeah. First of all, so the hurricane came in, right? We had 80 miles an hour winds. The hurricane came in Thursday afternoon and then did not subside until around noon, maybe 11 a.m. on Friday.
Okay.
And when it subsided, our power went out, our cell phones went out, our internet went out. we could not get down our road because of mudslides and so many trees being down. And we were 3 miles from the nearest fire station. So it took us bushwhacking 3 miles down the mountain to get to our fire station on day 4 to realize the extent of the devastation. And it wasn't until day 4 that anyone from the outside world showed up. And at that point, it was a couple of guys from Homeland Security.
Well, that has like Katrina, right? Where
Yeah.
nobody showed up for a week.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody's on their own. Like
Right.
your own survival's your own at that point.
Right. Right. Yeah. And my husband, Jeff, lived through Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. He's from New Orleans, born and raised, and they're used to hurricanes there. Right. But
Yeah.
Hurricane Katrina, as we all know, was devastating. So it was really interesting to watch his reaction versus my reaction when this hurricane hit. And this was a pivotal point in our marriage because Jeff has always had this attitude where, he's emotional and he's communicative and he's all these great things, but he has this kind of suck up and deal attitude that I've never understood. His capacity to pivot on a dime is much different than mine. And he did that. It took about 48 hours after the hurricane hit. And he was just in the mode of, we might not have power for months. We need to protect our food. We need to protect our water. We need to gather whatever resources we can and get in this for the long haul. And I'm thinking, I don't want to be here. Get me somewhere else. But after I started paying attention to what he was doing, I realized that he was going to survive way more effectively than I would survive if I was avoiding what was happening. So I made a decision to show up, to be fully present in the moment with what was going on, and decided that I was going to volunteer my services as a trauma chaplain because that's my background, that's my training. And when we got down to the fire station on day 4, I pulled our fire chief aside and I said, look, no one's here from the outside. We don't know if we're going to get any emotional, spiritual, mental help for these 300 people in our community who have just lost everything. And would you like my help? And he said, absolutely. So once I got into that role, that really assisted me with cultivating a sense of resilience in the middle of the devastation.
So you're actually focused on others at that point.
Yeah.
Did that help you cope with what was going on? To be able to focus?
Totally helped me. Yeah. And part of it goes back to a conversation you and I had 10 years ago or a dozen years ago, somewhere along that time frame. And I'd love to share that story if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we were in your office in Charlotte. I was part of some kind of a group program that you were doing with maybe about 30 people. And it was probably on the topic of making money. And I was up against a wall in my business. I think I had just gotten to my first $20,000 a month. And I was excited about it, but I wasn't getting to that next level. So I was in this group training with you. And I got up in front of the room. So there was a microphone in the front of the room. So I was a couple feet away from you. And everyone else was behind me staring at my ass while I was talking to you. Which is always super comfortable for everyone. Yeah. And I was sharing with you that my only model for entrepreneurism was my grandmother, who actually started her own business. She started an employment agency in the 1960s in Washington, D.C., and became the primary breadwinner in her family. She made a lot of money running that employment agency and opened a second location and everything before she sold it for millions of dollars. So that's pretty phenomenal to have that kind of role model, especially as a woman in another woman from that time frame. But my grandmother also sexually abused me when I was little. So I'm sharing this with you. And the first thing you said to me was, you caused that. You caused that. And in my mind, I thought, this man is crazy. What is he thinking? What is like a normal person, David, would say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm
Yeah.
so sorry that happened to you. That must have been so terrible. Tell me about your feelings. Let's dive into that."
Yeah.
And you didn't say that. You said you caused that. And I had to sit with that for a hot minute and figure out what you meant. And I believe what you were actually saying is, Emma, you are choosing to interpret that experience in that particular way through that
Yeah.
particular lens,
Yeah.
right?
Yep. Yep.
That feel accurate.
Yes, it does.
And I got that. So when the hurricane hit, I thought, okay, I can choose to interpret this experience in whatever way I want to. I don't have to interpret it as I'm a victim of a hurricane or I'm a survivor of a hurricane or, this is going to cost us tens of thousands of dollars to recoup all these damages and woe is me. And oh my God, I can't run my business because I don't have cell phone or internet access or power in my house, which
Right.
was the case for a month. Uh, I thought this is an opportunity. Everything happens for me, not to me. What is the opportunity here? And the opportunity was go be a trauma chaplain. And then the opportunity became start talking about what's happening, start sharing the story. And I started doing, I could find a way to get into Facebook, I was able to start doing daily Facebook posts about what was happening here in our community. And a publisher reached out to me about a month in and said, "We want to acquire this story. We want to turn this into a book."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's really great. So literally the outline of it came from the posts of the experience that you were having and how you were interacting with it.
Yeah. Exactly.
What did you experience with those folks that you were helping, those 300 people? Give us a description of what they were going through.
Yeah. A lot of them were re-traumatized. So I worked with a woman who was raped 5 years ago,
Okay.
and she felt re-traumatized because we had to get a lot of ATV paths going through people's properties because our roads were gone. So one of our paths was going through her property. So she was having strangers every day on these loud machines drive through her yard. And that was re traumatizing to her. So it was helping her to normalize what she was going through and attend to that. We had another family who, unfortunately, the day after the hurricane, lost a 2-year-old in a gun accident.
Oh my
So
God.
that, yeah,
And a day after the hurricane?
yep, a day after the hurricane, just a freak accident. So that became complicated grief, right?
Right.
And then how do you plan a funeral when you can't use your road to go to the funeral home, right?
Right. 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 100%.
And then there were people who were missing, and they were missing for so long that they were declared dead. But how do you have a funeral when there's no body?
Right. And have they even found all the bodies? Do you know that?
I don't know that for a fact. There are a heck of a lot of conspiracy theories floating
Yeah,
around
yeah, I'm sure.
has happened and not happened. So I can't speak to that in particular.
I don't know. I mean, something like that. The other thing is that it rips you of control in the moment of what like what you know. It's all of that's gone.
Exactly. And you have to figure out what your foundation is going to be when you
Yeah.
can't control what's happening to you on a daily basis and when you're just trying to get your basic needs met, which
Right.
was the case for most of us, certainly the first 2 weeks of how do we get shelter? How do we get food? How do we function on a day-to-day basis? How do we clean our clothes? How do we make sure that there's enough water in the house? How do we carry water when there's no transportation? Those
Right.
types of things.
This is interesting. I'm curious about this. When you started interacting with these people at the fire station, eventually people start coming together at a place. What was the level of denial at that moment?
Oh, it's huge.
It
Yeah.
was.
Well, which is, I think that's normal. And I think that's
Yeah.
important. right? Because if you really let it all soak in, you're not going to be able to do the basics. So
Right.
what I started to discover, and I've actually mapped this out now in the book, as well as in a trauma recovery program that I'm now offering because I've pivoted my whole business in the wake of the hurricane. It's another thing we can touch on.
Entrepreneurs, listen up. If you're feeling stuck, working harder, but not seeing bigger results, it's time for a quantum leap. The truth is, scaling your business isn't just about grinding out more hours, it's about shifting how you think. Most business owners unknowingly follow outdated success models that keep them plateaued, working in their business instead of growing it. And that's why I created the Quantum Leap Code 5-Day Accelerator. In 5 days, I'll teach you the 5 crucial thought patterns that separate highly profitable business owners from those who stay stuck. You'll learn exactly how to rewire your thinking, break through income ceilings, and start making bigger, faster moves in your business. We are asking for a $97 investment because we know that when money is involved, you're more likely to show up, engage, and actually implement what you learn. And the best part, 100% of your registration fee is going to disaster relief efforts in North Carolina and California. So not only are you committing to your growth, but you're also making a direct impact in the communities that need it most. This is happening March 3rd through 7th, and spots are limited. Don't keep waiting for success to happen. Make the decision to create it. Join me inside the Quantum Leap Code 5-Day Accelerator, and let's make 2025 your biggest year yet.
Is that there are actually 4 phases of trauma recovery. So the first phase is the rescue phase, where you're just trying to get your basic needs met: the food, water, shelter, sleep.
Okay.
And it's very normal to only be able to focus on those things.
So you find that people flip into that phase relatively easy, that first phase? It becomes very apparent to them that this is what they need to pay attention to?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Because that's kind of all your brain can do at that point.
Yeah.
We could retell what happened the day of the hurricane. So a lot of people were telling their same story over and over again, and we can focus on eating and shitting and sleeping.
Right. Yes.
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 Yeah.
And do you find that that's because their brain can't move forward yet? The retelling of the story so much in those first moments, they don't have a vision of what's next?
That's exactly what it is. And there aren't even a lot of emotions at that point. You know, the emotions for people didn't kick in really until the 3rd week, where they started to exhibit the trauma symptoms. They started to exhibit the PTSD or the overwhelm or the depression or the anger.
I can't. Well, it's interesting because I had an experience. Well, I had my experience in 1989 where I got sucked through the dam. And I flashed back to that momentarily when you were saying that, because I think I spent the first 48 hours just telling people what happened. Like there was nothing else my mind was focused on other than these are the steps that happened. These are the steps that happened. It took a while to move my head further into the experience of what was going on. So I can't, thank God you were there. Like God really used you in a very fantastic way.
Yep. 100%. And David, I trusted that, right? What if I had said, no, I'm not going to help other people.
Right.
I'm going to focus on myself. I mean, what would have been the outcome of that? I would have been isolated. I would have felt overwhelmed. I'd probably be depressed right now and unable to function. Thank God I said yes.
Yeah. And thank God you had the skills to do it.
Yeah.
So what was the next step after that?
So there's the rescue phase. That's phase 1. Phase 2 is what I call recovery, when the trauma symptoms kick in, when the PTSD symptoms kick in. And then the 3rd phase is recovery, where you start to say to yourself, okay, I guess we're in this. I guess this is happening. Now what? What's going to happen from here? How am I going to attend to myself? How am I going to attend to my home, my shelter, my work? You know, a lot of people were out of work as a result of Helene. A lot of businesses were gone as a result of Helene. So starting to grok the magnitude of the disaster and looking at being in this for the long haul. So most people were in that by week 5 or 6, realizing that avoiding wasn't going to be an option.
Yeah.
Although some people did, some people just evacuated as soon as possible and haven't even been back to their homes because they're not ready.
Yeah. I mean, I've heard some interesting stories. I mean, I've heard just like really things that make you think. My son shows up with a dog at my house. And I said, "Where did you get this dog?" And he said, "It's from Helene." And I said, "What are you talking about?" They said it was lost in the storm. Animal shelter grabbed it and they needed somebody to adopt it. He said, "We have no idea where this dog came from." They didn't know either. They were just trying to outsource the animals that they had rescued. And this was one of, and he still has the dog. He put it through all the medical stuff that it needed. It was, had all kinds of problems, but it's these things fascinate me tremendously because you've got the human spirit. And I was watching how people were coming in just not like the government, but just like normal people were coming in trying to help, right? With helicopters and money. And I mean, I don't know how much of what of that extent was the biggest benefit, but the fact that people will pull together in something like that to do it, because there's no roadmap out, right? It's like nobody knows how to do this. And if you did, you don't know how to do it in the mountains because you've never had a hurricane in the mountains before. So it's a totally new experience.
Yeah, exactly. And this is a thing, we need a roadmap. I mean, think about what has happened since Helene. 10
Yes.
days later was Hurricane Milton in Florida. Something like 14 days later was massive flooding in Valencia, Spain, that killed 217 people. They had a year's worth of rainfall in 8 hours. A couple of months after that, the fires in LA started, and then the flooding in LA started a couple of weeks after that. So we've run out of time to figure out how to process our trauma as we're going through it. We have this idea that, oh, this is stuff that happens to other people. No, it happened to Hollywood, right?
Yeah.
If it can happen to
Right.
Hollywood, and if it can happen to people who live in the mountains, no one is immune.
Right. Nobody. And it seems like we're in a time frame where everything is speeding up and condensing, right? Which is basically what you were just explaining. So the more people that have the ability to be able to help and guide other people that don't have skills through those things is essential, which is, I assume, how you've changed your business. Can you tell us about that?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So the fourth phase of trauma recovery is what I see as evolution. It's who we are becoming in the face of unexpected events and challenges and natural disasters or whatever it looks like. Trauma, Peter Levine, who's a specialist in trauma and is a psychoanalyst, psychotherapist, talks about how it doesn't matter what the degree of the trauma is or the nature of the trauma, the symptoms are always the same. So trauma is actually better defined by symptoms than by the event itself. So a traumatic event could be a divorce. It could be your child becoming addicted to drugs. It could be an unexpected illness in the family. It could be losing a job. It could be starting a job. There are lots of different types of trauma that can be attended to. And that's what I'm doing now in my business with my trauma recovery program. So it's got 3 levels. The first level is learning to attend to your own traumatic experience. The second level is learning how to help other people navigate theirs so that, for example, people who do disaster relief and come into areas like here in Western North Carolina to support other people and know what to say to them when they are, when they just look shocked and overwhelmed. And then the third level is a certification program to help people be able to teach this model to other people.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Where did you get the idea of the model for other people? I mean, that's really a pay it forward type of an idea. Like, here, teach one, teach another, whatever that saying is, right?
Exactly. I had a long conversation with Kevin King, who's the executive director of Mennonite Disaster Service. He wrote the foreword for the book. Part of the proceeds are going to that organization because they've just been phenomenal. And he essentially said to me, Emma, when I read your book, what struck me most is that no one else in my 30 years of working in disaster recovery is talking about this stuff, is talking about attending to the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspects of living through disasters. And that's what got my attention.
Did he give any insight as to why he thinks that is?
Well, I mean, no, I would say probably because it's not as sexy as rebuilding roads or water systems.
I do find that a little bit surprising. I got to be honest with you. With the amount of trauma that we've had, say, the last 10 years, it's been an enormous amount on our world, on our country. Like, that really surprises me.
Yeah.
That,
Me too.
but, I mean, it's got to start someplace, right? So, I mean, if you look at it, I guess, with a bigger picture, it takes people a certain period of time to realize something's wrong. My life isn't working the way that it did, or I'm making poor choices or something, something is affecting my thinking, and not even necessarily knowing what it is, whether it's Helene or it's COVID or it's, any of the other stuff that we've been exposed to now for the last several years. It's really outside of the norm of like when we were kids, and our parents were kids. Like they did not have that, in their life. It was a much slower paced, and I don't mean slower like, like what people would say, well, like, in the olden days or something like that. It was just that things weren't changing as fast.
Right.
Right?
Right. Yeah. And now we've got to figure out how to keep up with the news cycle.
Right.
Because trauma doesn't just affect people who are going through it, right? There are people all over the country who feel the impact of Hurricane Helene, which was only here in the Southeast, because they kept seeing in their news feeds and in their social media feeds horrible things, horrible images and stories. And you don't just let that go.
And like what you said before, whether they were true or not, right? All the conspiracy theories are just as traumatizing as what really happened to those individuals. Like it's not helping anything.
It's not. But it also makes sense to me. I mean, I live in rural Appalachia. I live in a teeny tiny community full of a lot of people who have lived here for generations, who are used to not being recognized and not being supported by large organizations or by our government. And, it's easy to ignore people who do not ask for help. So if you have this generational lineage of the government's never going to come in and help us, no one's going to ever come in and help us, then of course conspiracy theories are going to be birthed from that.
Right. I never thought about that. So you said it took a week to be able to communicate with the outside world. Is that right?
No, it took 3 weeks for me to get enough phone reception to have a 3-minute phone conversation.
So even if they wanted to ask for help, they couldn't.
Right. We started seeing helicopters probably by the end of the day 4, but no one landed here until day 6.
Until day 6. Were those private or was that government?
That was primarily military. It was
military.
Black Hawks, a lot of Chinooks delivering food and water.
Man, what a powerful story. Where do they get the book? Tell us where you can get the book.
You can get the book on every single online bookseller platform. Amazon, Barnes & Noble, bookshop.org. If you're in Canada, Indigo Books. Yeah, it was just released this weekend.
Fantastic. So I'm going to encourage everybody to go get that book. What do you say we do this? Let's have another conversation 6 to 8 months. I would really love to see where you are then and what your experience, how it's evolved. I'm very curious about the direction that this is going. So if you'd be open to that, I'd love to do this again.
Absolutely. That would be fantastic.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you very much for sharing this with us. Sympathies go out to you, your family, everybody that's up there. And I hope people can keep coming together to be able to help. And God bless you for being able to help the people that you are. I love what it is that you're doing. That's fantastic.
Thank you so much, David. I really appreciate that.